Hi there. Heike Rudolf and Rohr is joining me from Zurich, Switzerland, where she is an executive coach. Heike is a certified practitioner and instructor in logosynthesis, and she started her career as a research scientist in the diagnostics industry. From there, she moved over to the service industry as a human resource consultant, supporting executive searches, change management, career development, and other HR programs. And this led her to her current career in coaching, where she remains active today. For over 20 years, she has been mentoring individuals at all levels and across a wide variety of business sectors. So thank you for joining me, Heike. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you, Katie.
Good. Well, I wanted to start with asking you if you could describe how you were introduced to logosynthesis and what made you curious to learn about this model.
Okay. Interestingly, Pamela was the one who introduced me. At the time, we just founded our company in Zurich, and I was trying to establish a supervision group. And I don't know how I came across Pamela. I have no idea, no clue. But she ended up, and she left a flyer with me where one of the first conferences of logosynthesis happened in Zurich. I had no time to go there, but for one reason, I kept this flyer. And a couple of years later, I thought it would be time for another education and to open up and learn new things. And I digged it out from the staple, and I found it interesting to look into it. And a client of mine at the time had a big problem, which I did not address. And he told me maybe I could go to Willem Lammers in Bad Ragaz. Okay. And then it was the third synchronicity to look at the plans, what offers are there. And then I did the basics. And as a natural scientist, the concept of energy always interested me. So I knew that everything is energy. I knew that from the scientific point of view.
Right.
And I understand the wave and the material stuff and the things. And so I thought, let's have a look at it. How could this work in a coaching setting or in a consulting setting? And that was the beginning.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because often we talk about this as a spiritual model and as an energetic model, and there are a lot of the people that I've interviewed on this have started their career, like Regina, started their career on the sciences, and so it really seems to attract that background. And I think for me, one of the things from a scientific model, one of the fundamentals is that it's something is repeatable. And I find this model so repeatable.
Yeah. Definitely it is. But also the roots in science really helped me to accept it rather than thinking about spiritual model. I could not work with the executives in the first place on a spiritual model. It doesn't work. They would not accept me as an executive coach. Yeah. And I also I did work with people from ABB, a bunch of engineers.
Right.
You have to create evidence.
Right.
And it helped a lot to explain them. I simply said, okay, you know the energy model. Yes. Wave and material. Okay. So we can talk about that. And it was so easy.
Interesting. Good for you.
Yeah.
So as an executive coach, what type of supports are executives and leaders looking for right now?
I think it didn't change that much over the past 10 years. It's the speed. The people are facing the speed of change, the new technologies, digitalizations, and so they tend to lose themselves because they're always running behind schedule, and this creates a lot of stress. So at the end, I have stressed people sitting in front of me, whatever the reason is, but they are under pressure, they are under stress. And then you can start asking, okay, what is the trigger for your stress? And by this, then you can work with them.
Yeah, because
So
now we're
I took
talking a
some,
lot about that finding that calm in chaos, right? Because if we're not calm, then a lot of reactive stuff goes on. And
yeah,
especially in a leadership role, it ends up just going through the whole organization, right? And
right.
so if we're looking for calm, but what is it that you find specifically about this model that supports
Yeah,
that calmness?
yeah. I always had a holistic approach to coaching, body, mind, soul, or spirit, whatever you name it. And I found the work with logosynthesis addressing all, because you go and ask for the senses. What do you sense? What do you hear? What do you do? You don't ask what do you feel. You go for the senses according to the NLP WACOG. And so this was the holistic approach, which helped me to guide the people to self-awareness. What do you sense about yourself? What is where is your awareness? Do you sense yourself at all? And
I was
under
one of those
severe
ones that didn't.
stress, they
Yeah,
don't.
right.
So
Because you don't slow down
before,
for it.
yeah, and before starting with logosynthesis, I try to help them slow down and start perceiving their body reactions, their emotions, and I give them homework to take some notes over the next 2 weeks. What what do they perceive in their body? What do they detect about emotions and so on? Mm. So this was the very fruitful approach then.
Yeah, because you can actually shift those sensations, right? Like you can shift the physical sensations and the
Yeah, but you can only start working with physical sensations if they sense it. If they don't, you can't.
yeah. And I guess for me, what I enjoyed with this model is like just following that basic protocol
Yeah,
guides you to stop and pay attention when something's bothering you. What is it that's
yeah,
bothering you? And yeah, a lot of times it's like, well, I'm really busy. Well, do you ever stop and pause as to where do you feel that in your body when you're really busy? And what are
yeah,
that constant self-talk when we're really busy,
yeah,
and just having a
yeah,
very structured process to guide through it and
yeah,
actually resolve it, to me has
yeah,
been quite fascinating.
yeah. It is definitely, and very often I start with a reflection circle, that they start thinking about what's going on inside of me, and then I continue with logosynthesis.
Neat.
Mm,
Good.
yeah.
So, a lot in organizations, a lot of times people might not come looking for support until they're actually feeling that burnout, or they've gone through this prolonged stress and they're working really hard to hold things together, to control it. They feel the pressure of responsibility, and we're kind of conditioned to be strong and power through it all. And yet you can only handle so much before it starts to break down. And so, burnout prevention is a big piece without actually walking away from it altogether, right? So how can you get more flow in your work without walking away from it altogether, I guess? And so how does this model support burnout prevention for you?
It helps identifying the triggers. And you may start with the trigger of the day-to-day event, and with the continuous work with logosynthesis, you come to older triggers, and a broader spectrum of triggers. And then you can work with the people on the day sessions when they come, and solve the actual trigger, and like the onion shells, you reduce the triggers and help the people to come to their core and also to the core calmness slowly.
Right.
But it's not logosynthesis is fast, but such processes are not fast. It takes time to guide the people through.
Yeah, when I first started working with it, it's kind of layer by layer and issue by issue. And I always said, I wish I didn't wait until I was like 50 years old in order to start resolving all my triggers. But if I look back now, it certainly feels much more ease in my everyday life because, you know, one by one and layer by layer, it's certainly freed up a lot of energy just to enjoy life a bit more.
It does. I do my logosynthesis daily, also on simple things and little things, and it's really the layers which you take off and releasing the energy bound in it. Yeah.
So we know that toxic leadership can be really damaging in the overall workplace, and there's a lot of talk out there about toxicity in the workplace, and yet in many cases leaders might not even really be aware that their behaviors are toxic, right? It's their reactions and how they're responding at work. And from my experience, leaders really want to do what's best for the organization and for their people, but they're stuck in these patterns that they may have learned through their previous bosses, or they've learned these lessons as to how you move forward in the organization, and this is the way you lead. Or it might be, you know, someone that like a parent, some influential person from before that they've kind of learned their style. Do you deal a lot with toxicity? Do people come looking for your support with that?
Not much. But I know about this, and if I have a coachee with such an issue, first I start helping this person to understand that there are different styles of communication, and that the other party may have a different view on the world, and it may be the same subject, but this person has a different view, and you can nicely fight on the truth of the different view until you understand that this person has other classes on the nose. I start with that. And this very often helps already to do a shift in the behavior. But this lasts only if the situation is nice, but under stress, then they fall back. And then you can start again working with the triggers which cause stress. Then, because very often harmful behavior, toxic behavior, is a result of exaggerated strength. Then the risk is that these strengths turn into weaknesses. So then I come up with the vulnerability concept, that you do not need to be the hero all the time. Don't stress your strength too much, especially if you're in an environment where you have a lot of employees. They build up trust much more easy if they also sense that you have weaknesses, that you do not really focus on your strength only.
Okay. Yeah. And it's that vulnerability that people kind of struggle with, isn't it?
Especially men.
Well, and I find this model has been so beneficial on that vulnerability side, because at the end of the day, when you know that you're reacting to something and you know that there's something triggering that reaction, and you know you can shift it, like, well, it kind of takes the emotion and that, you know, all that energy out of the vulnerability. It's like, yeah, I'm reacting to something, I can resolve it and I can move on, and I don't have to get so frozen and trying to be strong, right? And it's a little bit, I often think of that rigidity, and you know,
it's frozen energy.
And in my background especially, it was be strong and power through, and you can be strong and power through, but the model I find is from a vulnerability standpoint is very powerful, because you can just realize that it is just a reaction. It's not
Yeah.
a character
Yeah.
flaw. It's not like it's not something that a personality trait that you can't do anything about. Like, sure, it might take work, and sure, it might be deeply ingrained, so there might be a lot of layers, but there's much more of an acceptance, and there's acceptance for myself, but also acceptance for how other people are reacting. So.
Exactly, and it takes a lot of load from the shoulders. I can do something about it, and an exaggerated strength, understanding that an exaggerated strength ends up in a weakness, and vice versa, help the people that are not stuck in it.
Mm-hmm.
There's an opportunity, a chance that I can get out of this. And then we're very close to the energy aspects, energy bound in your weakness, energy bound in your belief system that you have to behave like that in order to be a respected leader. And then you can work on those concepts which come from somewhere, learned, trained, parents, first boss. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other thing, I guess, on, that whole reactive behavior and those strengths kind of getting in the way sometimes is, we're all doing well, and we're all trucking along, working hard, being successful. And then all of a sudden something changes. And, it's almost like, what's that straw that broke the camel's back, that just crashed it, right? And again, it's a rigidity piece, because you're holding everything together, and then all of a sudden something snaps. And so the pandemic could be one of those. For us, when I was in my corporate career working at Kraft, Heinz bought Kraft, and all of a sudden there was a massive layoff, right?
Yeah,
like a massive layoff. So you go to work one day, and coworkers on either side of you are gone, right? And so that's stressful, and then it's systems changes and all of that. And so all of a sudden, people that had been doing really well were just, not functioning at work anymore. So it's like, at what point do things break?
Yeah, and especially the pandemic brought up old pains, old fear. So people were forced to face themselves, because they could not escape. They could not engage in a second order dissociation, like sports or party or shopping or being active all the time. They had to stay at home, and it threw them back on their own fears, and they had to deal with it. Unknown situations, unknown perceptions, unknown emotions. And I had a few people who came with strong stress symptoms because of that home office cage, prison, which they felt.
Yeah, that's interesting, because a lot of times we talked about, some people weren't safe at home, right? Like if there was cases of domestic violence, or if there was, depending what your workplace at home was. But yeah, I haven't really talked a whole lot about that lack of distraction.
Yeah. From day one to day two, there was nothing you could do.
Yeah.
And on top, the stress establishing your online system. I think this was the first 3-4 months of the pandemic when people really fell back on their own self.
And if you're not comfortable with what's actually happening, you might not even know why you're feeling bad, right? Like if you're and your friends and your cohorts and your work peers may be enjoying the work from home, whereas you're struggling with
Yeah.
the work from home,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily easy to explain what you're
Yeah, I
feeling.
had a friend. She's one of the examples I did not want to share, but when we bring this up, she did not feel safe at home. She did not like working at home, and she came to me. I've worked with her in Logosynthesis earlier, and then I worked with her. And what is stressing you? It was the table in front of her, and then we released the stress from the table, and then she came to a point, oh, I need more space. And I said, okay, I know they're flat. And I said, this room there, what can you do with this room? And she opened up her mind. She could think clearly about changing the furniture of this room, and she made it her working room. So she had the opportunity to close the door and get back into her living area. And it relieved her in an enormous amount. She really felt much better. She was more productive. She was more inspiring others. So she really gained a lot from this change of environment by sensing that I do not feel happy and safe being all time at home.
Yeah. And it's nice to be able to kind of resolve those blocks, that you can actually see a different solution, right? That you can actually look at it differently.
Her realistic mind opened up, because when the stress is so strong, you are stuck. And then she could thinking in a educated maternal way, and she changed. She went to IKEA and bought some stuff. She really changed it. All fine.
Wow.
Okay.
So one of the things that I was curious about is, like, eventually leaders come to a point where, they're considering retiring or leaving the workforce. Sometimes, their health might be suffering, or the workplace has changed a lot and they don't want to be there. Sometimes people might end up leaving earlier than planned, and others end up feeling like I can't leave, so I have to stay, but they end up disengaging. So there's a lot of talk in, on LinkedIn and that, about the great resignation and quiet quitting. And from my perspective, these moves tend to be very reactive rather than, someone actually taking meaningful action on their career. So do you see a role for logosynthesis in helping in these situations? And
I always work with people in the career counseling aspect on such questions. Why do I do what I do? What is the purpose of my work? And that's also what we do in logosynthesis. Find out your mission. What is your mission in life? And I think this silent quitting is a danger, because people are silent then, and they don't come out. If they come out and they address the issue, you can work on such thing. What is blocking you? What is in your way? You could do the timeline with logosynthesis, and you can work with them on, where do you want to go? What is your target? What is your aim? And this helps a lot. And then you work. It's interesting. Then things come up, like the father, or a concern, a belief. It's not allowed to quit the job, and these things can, and it's very nice to work with the people on the timeline there.
yeah, and once that, we kind of say that once that those blocks or the triggers are resolved, then you can actually make a better decision. You can have an adult conversation. You can see broader perspectives. So sometimes it might be that you do want to leave, and sometimes it might be that you do want to stay. And there's things that you have to act on in order to make your situation better. But kind of takes people a little bit out of that victim role, I think, is it?
Yeah, it's I did a lot of outplacement during the time when I learned about logosynthesis, and it's interesting that people very often have a clue that something in the workplace is not or no longer okay, but they don't dare to jump, and then they will become laid off. And a lot of them said it was such a relief that they laid me off. I did not have to take the decision. And this is then a good start if they are relieved to work towards the future. But sometimes you need a kick in your ass by the life in order to do the jump.
Well, I've transitioned my career a couple times now since I started with logosynthesis, and it's been helpful to actually, what's that timing? What's the, just it's one thing to say I've had enough, I'm quitting, I'm walking out the door tomorrow because I don't like what's going on anymore. But it's another thing if you can take some action so that it can all flow for both parties, right? For the company and for yourself, that, things can flow more smoothly, because everybody at some point in time is going to have a transition in their career, and several transitions, and that's part of growing, right? And one of the things, even, when I was doing some of the logosynthesis on it, was some of that belief that I have to be here and do my share. Like, we're going through a really difficult time. I can't leave my coworkers because I have to help out and do my share, right? And I think that goes back to my little farming upbringing, but
these are typical beliefs. Huh?
Yeah. And so if you're kind of frozen in that and you can't, and once that's gone, then you're a little bit better able to see some options, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm German by origin, and in Germany, my parents grew up in starting your career with the same employer and ending your career with the same employer. So this belief was built into my system very strongly. But the first time when I quit, when I walked out, it took me quite some time to take this decision, to go through a process, and this was long before I knew anything about coaching or beliefs. So my belief was, it's not allowed.
Right.
Yeah, it's not allowed. It's against the rules.
Yeah. And I saw it with people, like, just when you start listening to conversations, there were people, when I was working at Kraft with Kathy, you can't leave because you have your pension and you can't leave until, right? And so some of that you could see kind of those experiences of their parents and what they went through and how that influenced their belief system, and how their belief system was different than my belief system. And some of it is, just recognizing, paying attention, I guess, paying attention to the thoughts and paying attention to what you get worked up over, and saying, oh, maybe there's something there that's either holding me back or getting in the way.
And I think the job as such is very much linked to your lifestyle, to your status, to your belonging, or the things you can afford. So the job represents something very, very strong, influencing your full life. So people really think about, or let's say the old generations, the youngest, they go on gig jobs, but my generation, and probably yours as well, we link the job, we identify the rest of our lives with each other, and that really is a strong, very strong bond.
Yeah, and when you spend so much time at work, right? Like, one of the engagement questions that we always had was, do you have a best friend at work? and that was an indication of how engaged you were at work. But if you think of how much time you spend at work, and you know, for me, with my raising family and everything while working full time, you didn't have a whole lot of time for anything else. So that was your life, right? So yeah, so it's normal in a lot of ways. But again, it's being able to, and that's where logosynthesis helped me a lot, is just kind of disentangle it almost, that you're not stuck in it, so you can see what's your life and what's your work. And
well, I think that helps a lot to identify that the job is just a deal. Life is much more, and yourself is not your job.
Right.
That helps a lot here. And when I was doing outplacement, I did not apply a lot of logosynthesis. I was a beginner at that time. I applied logosynthesis only later. So sometimes I thought, how could I apply it there? But I have some examples of previous clients who were stuck in the drama, losing a job. And there I see a lot of opportunities for logosynthesis. Then you can release the drama.
Yeah, and just noticing what conversation keeps repeating over and over again, right? Like who they're complaining about, or you know, whose fault it is, and things along that line. And a lot of times, you know, we want to blame the company or management, and again, once we it ends up impacting our health, right? If we're looking at the company or management as being kind of their fault, right? The devil, it impacts our health. And so if it bothers us, we have the power to let that go, so that it doesn't continue to erode on us. And really, you know, a lot of times it's you know, it may not be as polarized as we think it is when we're actually going through it.
Yeah, and I think it opens up a completely new view to the next job, because you're not stuck in repeating the same thing again and again. You've learned something about yourself. You've learned something about letting go and other people's faults. So you can really start a new job from a fresh perspective.
Yes.
So logosynthesis really can create a better future then.
It's always good not to get stuck in those patterns, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, like in the series of interviews, I speak a lot with coaches and therapists. And so, you know, sometimes I think, okay, well, we're talking about leadership, and then the next interview we'll be talking about trauma. And at first glance, we kind of think of these as different topics, and yet we're all human, and we all aspire to lead in some sense. And we all experience trauma in some form, even though we might not really identify it. And certainly some people have experienced much more significant trauma than others. But as a coach, and you're looking to help people move forward in their life, how does trauma show up in leadership coaching? And then how does this model support you when it does show up?
I think trauma shows up when the person expresses a lot of repetitive patterns. And what do I do then? I had one client that's an interesting example. This was not a leader. It was a person who was laid off, and he told me, I don't need career counseling. I do a new education. I become a healer and a practitioner for somatic, what was this? Chiropraxis or something. I don't know how it's spelled in English. And I said, oh, fine. What are you doing there? And then he started stumbling. And then he told me he missed the exams. Oh, good case for coaching. So I asked him, okay, what happened? Do you know this pattern? Had you had this in school before? And so on. And then we ended up in a trauma that his father tried to train him maths. And whenever he did not get the equation, he was hit on the head.
Wow.
And when he told the story, immediately the tears came up. And then we worked with the image of the father, and there was an immediate relief. And I helped him through this next circle of exams by a lot of different things. But whenever something similar to this video came up, we worked on it with Logosynthesis, and he passed the exams with a mark 1, which is the best you can get in Germany.
Wow.
That was great, and I was so thankful for this experience. And he now and then writes a WhatsApp and telling how good he's feeling now. Yeah, that was nice. Yeah, it was beautiful.
And you see so many people that have so much potential, right? And yet they come to this one thing that they just can't move forward.
Yeah.
And in our society, you do have to pass tests, and you do have to take exams.
Yeah, it's matrix.
Yeah.
And so I think is it a risk that you tap into trauma working with logosynthesis? It is a risk, but I think logosynthesis also gives us a tool, to work with it. When I have the feeling this person is no longer able to take own decisions, then I stop. Then I say, okay, it's better you go to a therapist. But if this person is still able to take on decisions in the sense of saying, yes, I want to look at it, no, I don't want to look at it, then I dare to continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I find is, Willem has certainly clarified the role of counseling versus coaching having more of a forward focus, like moving forward in your life. And there's a lot of things to be cautious of, right? And it comes back to the strength of the working alliance. But I also have a lot of trust when we follow the protocol as it's designed. That protocol does a lot of the work for the person. So especially if it
and
is...
also for me, sorry to interrupt you, it also does a lot of the work for me. I don't need to pull the rope. The protocol does the work.
Right. Yeah, and they don't have to go back and kind of relive that whole event. They just have to be able to get in touch with what that trigger is, and then the protocol does it. Yeah.
So,
do you have an example? I know you've given us a couple of examples already as far as your work. Is there something that stands out for you that you'd like to share for an example, or?
No, those examples that just came during the flow of the conversation. I was working with an HR director of an international nonprofit organization, and he came to me with some concerns whether he's the right person in the job. He was in this job for more than 15 years, and he had a very good reputation. But he was suffering from self-doubts. Am I the right person? And with this person, I worked from the very beginning with logosynthesis. And we, at the very deepest level, we came to a point that he grew up in a very Catholic family. And we came up to the 7 death sins. I could address this with him as he was Catholically educated. And we could relieve a lot of those things. And on the way to all these different layers, we worked with daily situations with a colleague, an aggressive female. She was stressing, and we really could step by step help him to say, I'm the right person for this job. And he went out and really told this to his team. Okay, we are the right people in this role. Let's really rock the boat. And he
Wow.
changed the
Wow.
whole setup of his team. He delegated much more. He let go, and since that he has no longer a workload of 55 hours. He
Isn't that
went back playing sax, and he is really like a turned glove, this person.
And his
This
team
was,
probably enjoys working with him more because he's more
yeah, of
relaxed.
course, of course. And also the board, they listen much more. The whole change of the team setup, it has to be presented to the board. And if you don't believe in yourself, and if you don't believe in your concept, they don't believe you. So he really presented it with a broad breast and big shoulders, and he got the okay.
Wow.
That's a
Wow.
very, very nice example. It happened 21.
Isn't that
20,
something?
21.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And a lot of times it's true. Like once things start to shift, you don't really have to understand how it's working or why it's working. It just feels better, and
Yeah,
things flow more easily. Yeah.
yeah.
And more impactful.
Very often I have a lot of reflective people coming to me, so it's easy to work with them on a very intense level, and that creates the biggest shifts then.
Right. And that's the strongest working alliance, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the stronger the working alliance, the bigger the shifts.
Yeah,
Yeah, I often say if people don't believe in the work and they come and they say the sentences on something, they can notice a shift. But the more open they are and more curious they are, then often you notice more impactful
yeah.
shifts.
I made some people curious by just applying the sentences on an issue. And then there was one lady from Germany who said, I don't understand it, but it works. And then very often, if it's possible, these are online coaches, so I do not have the private address of these people, but sometimes I send the book from Laurie,
Right.
Let Go, and then they have some background to read through and understand a bit better what we were doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the beauty of it is you don't have to understand and it still works, right? Like you just have to follow the process. But for me, it really sparks a curiosity as I want to figure it out.
If you work with executives, they have to understand at least a bit. Otherwise, they don't follow you. Yeah. I didn't see any executive who's really trusting and does not want to understand. They are so trained and primed to understand. So you have to give them a piece of understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I find it interesting where you approached it from the science background to
so easy for
kind
me.
of explain it, right? There's so many different angles to come from, isn't it?
Yeah.
Quantum physics, who would have thought?
Yeah, that's the attraction. I left biology and went into the services, and when quantum physics came in, and also the neurosciences came in, I was back and the circle closed. So I felt, wow, there's a reason why I studied biology, and there's a reason why I went into services. It really came together.
Yeah.
And for me, this created a whole lot of joy,
Yeah,
and depth and understanding, also from my side in working with the clients.
Yeah, and for me, like I have a science background. I was a dietitian for years, and so there was always something in the sciences that you couldn't really explain, right? And so and that's the nature of it. and it's to try to bring understanding to it. And so for me, this model answered a lot of those
Yeah.
unanswered, unexplained questions.
Yeah.
So it fits very nicely in with it.
Yeah, it does. It does.
So do you have a key message you would like to leave people about leading people?
Lead yourself first.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, lead yourself first before you lead people. And logosynthesis helps a lot to lead yourself from the center, from the essence, before you really enter the matrix of your skills and your duties. To lead yourself first.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's been awesome, Heike.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And talking about my profession helps me to touch again my passion. I really talk about my profession in such kind of depth, and again I felt my heart beating a bit stronger and liked it. Thank you so much for approaching me.